chosen one, there was one decision heaven had been waiting for, and that decision has already been made. To the people around you, it may have seemed ordinary. There was no celebration, no dramatic announcement, no visible sign that anything had changed. Yet in the unseen places, something shifted the moment you stopped agreeing with the version of yourself that kept returning to what God was asking you to leave behind. You did more than walk away from a situation. You crossed an invisible line within your own spirit. You moved from constant striving into trust, from uncertainty into obedience, from living in survival mode into a deeper surrender. What changed was not only your circumstances, something inside you finally aligned with what had been growing in your heart for a long time. You stepped beyond the need for approval and into confidence in what God had already shown you. Heaven witnessed that moment. That is why your spirit feels different now. The conversations that once held you no longer fit the same way, and the things that once tempted you seem strangely distant. You may feel exhausted, yet there is clarity in you. You may feel emotional, yet there is a steadiness underneath it all. Quietly, something inside you knows that the waiting season has changed. Allow this message to meet you gently today. Let it settle into the places that already recognize its truth. The season of waiting has reached its turning point, but what comes after breakthrough is sacred. The invitation now is simple. Honor what God has brought you through and resist the urge to return to what you were just released from. There is a kind of grief that arrives after obedience. Everything around you may appear unchanged. The light still enters the room the same way. The house may be still. The world may not have announced that anything significant happened. Yet deep inside, you can feel that something has been marked forever. Even if you cannot fully explain it, you know you cannot go back as the person you were before. What once appealed to you carries a different weight now. Old conflicts no longer pull you into the same reactions. The doors that once felt familiar may still be standing, but they no longer feel like they belong to you. This is not uncertainty. This is evidence that you have crossed into something new. Your spirit has already embraced what your mind and body are still learning to live out. That can feel strange at times. When your soul moves ahead before circumstances catch up, there is often a tenderness that follows. You may feel exposed. You may even wonder why this unexpected calm feels so unfamiliar. Yet God saw every part of the decision you made, especially the moments no one else understood. He saw when you chose honesty over self-betrayal. He saw when you stopped responding to what no longer deserved your attention. He saw when you stopped seeking approval from people who could never validate what he had already confirmed. He saw the trembling in your hands when you finally closed a door that had remained open for too long. He saw the moment you stopped explaining your pain to those who benefited from your confusion. He saw the moment you finally trusted the warning that had been pressing against your spirit for months. To others, it may have looked insignificant. To heaven, it was agreement. That is the word over this season of your life. Not performance, not perfection, not public proof. Agreement. For so long you prayed for freedom while keeping a pathway back to captivity. You asked for a new season while still negotiating with old attachments. You longed for peace, yet part of you kept returning to the very places that taught you how to live without it. There is compassion for that journey. Pain often teaches us to trust what is familiar, even when it hurts. Loneliness can make unhealthy things feel comforting, and long delays can make us question what we already know in our spirit. Then comes a sacred moment when God does not need to speak louder. Instead, He allows your spirit to become honest enough that pretending is no longer possible. That was the move. You did not need a crowd around you. You did not need a title, recognition, or a flawless plan. You needed one sincere moment of alignment, one decision to stop turning away from the truth God had already placed inside you. That is why the atmosphere around your life feels different now. Something has been marked in the unseen. The old season may still linger at the edges of your world, but it no longer has the authority to define who you are. It may call your name, It may remind you of old versions of yourself, yet it no longer owns what God has delivered. Look closely at what has been changing within you. You stopped demanding understanding from people who were never meant to carry your calling. You stopped pretending everything was fine while your spirit was exhausted. You stopped making peace with the very things that kept stealing your peace. That was not weakness fading away. That was discernment awakening. You may have noticed that familiar places feel heavier now. The same rooms, the same voices, the same patterns carry a different feeling. Often it is not because those things changed, it is because your agreement changed. Your spirit has begun to recognize that it was never meant to settle in places that continually drain the life from it. You may also feel freedom and grief at the same time. That can be confusing. There may be moments when tears still come, even though you know God released you from what once held you. Yet grief is not always evidence of a wrong decision. Sometimes grief is simply the sound of your soul leaving behind a place it once called home. You are not fighting the way you used to. You are seeing more clearly. You are no longer trying to win every old battle. Instead, you are asking whether those battles belong in the life God is building through you at all. You have not become cold or distant. You have not lost your compassion. You simply stopped abandoning your own heart in the process. That is why some people may misunderstand what is happening. Those who are comfortable with your constant self-sacrifice may call your healing distance. They may call your boundaries pride or your obedience attitude. Let them say what they need to say. Your growth does not require everyone else's approval. Some people only knew how to relate to the version of you that was always available at your own expense. When that version began to heal, they did not lose access to your love. They lost access to your self-abandonment. There is another sign of this crossing. You have become more careful about what voices you allow into your spirit. Every opinion no longer deserves equal weight. Every urgent emotion no longer feels like a divine instruction. Something within you has become wiser and more discerning. You are learning the difference between pressure and guidance. Pressure rushes you back into old cycles. Guidance steadies you and leads you forward in peace. Pressure demands. Guidance invites. Pressure is loud, while true direction often arrives quietly, leaving a settled certainty in your spirit. You are tired, and that tiredness is real. The tears were real. The long nights were real. Yet beneath all of it rests a clarity that was not there before. You may not feel celebration yet, but you know something has ended. You know the old season no longer gets the final word. Heaven was never waiting for you to suffer longer. Heaven was waiting for agreement. It was waiting for the moment when your choices finally aligned with the prayers you had been praying. Some doors remain closed while we keep asking old rooms for permission to leave. Some blessings require us to release what would have destroyed them before they arrived. God was never withholding from you. He was preparing you. He was shaping you. He was protecting the promise from being placed inside patterns that could not sustain it. What felt like silence was not abandonment. It was a holy work taking place beneath the surface. God was exposing hidden agreements, revealing where fear had disguised itself as wisdom, and where guilt had learned to sound like humility. Think of the moment when Moses stood before the sea. Behind him was the place of bondage. Ahead was an impossible path. The waters did not part while the people debated whether they should return. The opening came when they agreed to move forward. Your decision carries that same kind of significance. Maybe there was no dramatic scene. Maybe there was simply a quiet moment when you finally chose what your spirit had known all along. Maybe you did not lift a staff. Maybe you simply closed a door. Maybe your move was as simple as closing a door that had stayed open too long. Maybe you stopped reaching out first. Maybe you chose forgiveness without stepping back into the same cycle. Maybe you finally spoke the truth. Or maybe you allowed yourself to rest when guilt kept insisting that your worth had to be earned. Whatever it was, do not underestimate it simply because it happened quietly. Some of the most life-changing decisions happen far away from public recognition. They happen in silent rooms where no one is watching, no one is applauding, and no one fully understands why your heart is shaking while you make them. Yet heaven saw every part of it. Heaven saw the comfort you attempted to return to, the attachment that still tugged at you, and the fear that whispered you might be making the wrong choice. Even so, you chose the path that honored what God had been showing you. That is why this moment carries more weight than it may appear. You are standing at the edge of something new. The doorway is open enough for you to recognize it. But this is not a season for rushing ahead recklessly. God is teaching you how to cross with intention, with trust, and with reverence instead of anxiety. The decision itself may seem small when you look back on it. Perhaps it was choosing silence instead of another argument. Perhaps it was resisting the urge to defend yourself. Perhaps it was finally refusing to use pain as a reason to return to something that had already run its course. Maybe it was the moment you stopped mistaking confusion for love, delay for humility, or fear for humility. Maybe it was the moment you admitted that peace was no longer something you could postpone. Let that truth settle gently within you. What happened was not accidental, it was not insignificant, and it certainly was not overlooked. Heaven was never waiting for a performance. It was waiting for alignment, and your spirit finally gave its honest yes. There is a difference between what opens through striving and what opens through agreement. Striving pushes and forces, always trying to make something happen. Agreement creates space for God to unlock what was already prepared. That is why what comes next begins differently. It begins with a quiet release, the kind that arrives when your heart finally matches the prayer it has been carrying. This matters because heaven does not always respond by changing everything around you overnight. Often the first gift after a season of confusion is clarity. And clarity can feel surprisingly uncomfortable when it first arrives. It does not always feel like celebration. Sometimes it feels like a deep, clean ache because you suddenly recognize truths you can no longer avoid. That recognition brings peace, but it can also bring grief. You begin seeing what you once tolerated with different eyes. The places that once felt normal start feeling heavy. Familiar voices sound different. Old patterns lose their sense of belonging. They may still be familiar, but familiarity and peace are not the same thing. You may have been praying for visible answers. You may have longed for the opportunity, the relationship, the provision, the breakthrough, or the sign that everything was changing. Yet God knows that without clarity, even a blessing can become another place where you lose yourself. So before opening the next door, He helps you see clearly. He allows you to recognize what nourishes your spirit and what slowly drains it. He removes the fog that once covered your discernment and lets old cycles reveal themselves for what they truly are. This is not rejection. It is protection. It is the kindness of God refusing to let you walk blindly into what you have already been freed from. That is why certain conversations feel different now. You hear the same words, yet they no longer settle inside you the same way. You witness the same behaviors, but you can no longer explain them away with stories that once kept you attached. Something inside you has stopped confusing dysfunction with love. Receive that clarity instead of resisting it. It is one of the clearest signs that your decision was real. The old season may still try to speak, but it no longer carries the same power over you. What once attracted you now reveals itself. What once trapped you now teaches you. And often, after clarity, comes separation. This is the part many people struggle with because separation rarely feels comfortable at first. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like loss. Sometimes it even resembles rejection when, in reality, God is creating room for something healthier to grow. You may notice people pulling away or certain relationships losing the closeness they once had. As your agreement changed, everything connected to your old agreement felt the shift. Some people were attached to the wounds you carried rather than the person you were becoming. Some were comfortable with your constant availability but struggled when healing introduced boundaries. Some appreciated what you gave while resisting the growth that was changing you. That is why obedience sometimes leads to distance, before it leads to visibility. God may quiet certain voices before strengthening your own. He may loosen old ties before releasing new provision. Not everyone who benefited from your difficult season is meant to walk with you into what comes next. Do not assume every ending is a loss. Some endings are rescue. Do not interpret every silence as abandonment. Sometimes silence gives your nervous system permission to stop living in constant defense. And not every closed chapter is failure. Some chapters close because the next season needs room to arrive without carrying the weight of the old one. You may even experience what feels like growth guilt. Your spirit recognizes that you are changing, but old conditioning still tries to convince you that choosing yourself is wrong. Protecting your peace may feel uncomfortable at first. Setting limits may feel unfamiliar. There may be moments when you wonder if obedience has made life harder for others. Listen carefully to this. You are not responsible for making everyone comfortable with your healing. You are not called to keep sacrificing yourself so others never have to adjust. And you are not required to drag old expectations into a new season, simply because people preferred the version of you that had no boundaries. Many people reach this stage and begin questioning themselves. They make the right decision, then stare at the empty space left behind. They wonder if they made a mistake because the old noise is gone. They question whether the cost was too high. Yet, that space is not evidence that something went wrong. It is evidence that something finally left. A room feels different after it has been cleared. A healing wound feels tender when fresh air reaches it. A soul that has spent years surviving under pressure often needs time to recognize peace when it arrives. That process is natural, and it is part of what comes next. After clarity comes separation, and after separation comes a deeper kind of preparation. Heaven begins creating capacity within you. Yet before that fully unfolds, there is something important to understand. Your spirit may have already crossed into new ground, while your mind and body are still learning how to live there. That is why some people make the right spiritual decision and still feel tired, scattered, slow to adjust, or uncertain in unexpected moments. The crossing may already be complete in your spirit, while the rest of you is still learning how to live beyond the rhythms of survival. There are moments when you know God has spoken, yet your thoughts still feel weary from everything they have carried. You sense that a new door has opened, but parts of your inner world are still responding from years of pressure, disappointment, and survival. That can be confusing because your spirit recognizes the change before your mind fully settles into it. For some of you, a deeper question is beginning to surface. What if the mental fog was never who you truly were? What if the heaviness you've carried in your thinking was never proof that you were falling behind, somehow broken or less favored than others? What if the constant demands of life slowly pulled you away from the clarity your soul was always meant to know? Hold that thought gently for now. There is something important to understand before anything else. God is not only interested in restoring what is happening around you, He is also restoring the inner places that help you recognize, receive, and care for what He is bringing into your life. That is why capacity matters so much. Capacity is not the blessing itself. It is the space within you that can hold the blessing without turning it into anxiety, fear, or self-sabotage. It is the ability to receive peace without expecting disaster, to receive love without preparing for loss, and to receive provision without feeling guilty for having enough. Many people pray for open doors while overlooking the inner strength required to walk through them well. They ask for visibility while still carrying wounds that depend on approval. They ask for love while their hearts remain prepared for abandonment. They ask for increase while old beliefs still argue against receiving anything good. God cares too deeply to ignore those places. He is not only preparing the answer to your prayer, He is shaping the version of you that can carry that answer with stability, wisdom, and peace. What you called waiting was never empty space. It was creating room inside you. What appeared to be delay was preparation unfolding beneath the surface. What felt like silence was often protection. What looked like loss was making space. What felt like loneliness was setting you apart for something new. Even when it seemed as though nothing was happening, heaven was quietly creating room in you for what could never fit inside the old version of your life. This is formation. God is teaching your heart that goodness can arrive and remain. He is teaching your body that peace does not signal danger. He is teaching your mind that clarity does not require constant urgency. And He is teaching your spirit how to receive without fear. If survival has been your normal way of living, receiving may feel unfamiliar at first. You may be accustomed to striving, proving yourself, scanning for problems, and preparing for disappointment before it arrives. When the pressure finally begins to lift, the quiet can feel almost unsettling because your nervous system has spent so long expecting the opposite. Sometimes that is when old patterns try to return. Not because you failed and not because your progress was imagined, but because healing often feels unfamiliar before it feels natural. The soul can miss what hurt it simply because it spent so much time there. Familiarity can disguise itself as comfort when the new season still feels unfamiliar. That is why this message continues to return to the same truth. Protect what has been established. You do not need to repeat the decision to prove it was real. You do not need to revisit the old season to validate the breakthrough. Your task now is to honor the agreement that changed everything. Allow clarity to keep speaking. Allow healthy separation to finish its work. Allow your capacity to grow without rushing back toward the very things that kept you small. There is wisdom in letting the new season settle into your life before demanding immediate evidence of where it is leading. Take a moment and breathe. Let your shoulders relax. Let your hands rest open instead of clench. You do not have to chase another sign today. And you do not have to convince yourself that you deserve what God has already begun to unfold. This day can be simple. You can sit quietly with what has already been revealed. You can allow the room to be still. You can let your body learn that obedience does not always need to be followed by anxiety. You can allow yourself to be loved by God without turning it into another performance. Take one honest breath, not a dramatic one and not a perfect one. Just a simple reminder that you are still here, still held, and still being restored. Even if the visible parts of your life have not fully caught up to what has already shifted inside you, there is nothing you need to force in this moment. The decision has already been made. The threshold has already been crossed. Your responsibility right now is not to rush ahead in fear, but to stand in the peace that comes from knowing God saw your yes. He saw the courage it required, and He saw the cost. Yet another truth rises here. The old season does not always disappear the moment a new one begins. Sometimes it returns quietly. It comes through memories, familiar emotions, old guilt, or subtle doubts that invite you to question what God has already confirmed. That is why discernment becomes so important after breakthrough. The decision was powerful, but what it created must be protected. Old cycles often try to negotiate their way back into your life. They rarely arrive looking dangerous. Sometimes they sound reasonable. Sometimes they sound reasonable. Sometimes they even sound wise. Pressure may try to rush you. Guilt may try to make you smaller again. Fear may attempt to redefine what God already promised. Nostalgia may soften the edges of old bondage until it begins to look inviting once more. Be careful with anything that makes captivity appear comforting. God did not bring you into clarity so that confusion could regain its place. He did not separate you from old patterns so you could rebuild them yourself. He did not expand your capacity so it could be poured back into environments that never honored who you were becoming. The door is open. The agreement is real. The shift has already happened. What comes next is not about proving your strength. It is about remaining faithful to the freedom that has already begun. The old season often returns with a quieter voice than before. It may arrive through a memory that suddenly feels warmer than it really was. It may arrive through guilt that questions your decision. It may arrive through one familiar invitation that makes you wonder whether one more conversation or one more visit could really matter. Yet many cycles are rebuilt through the phrase, just one more time. One more time becomes the opening through which old patterns return. One more time becomes the excuse that delays the new season. One more time becomes the place where guilt disguises itself as compassion while quietly asking you to abandon the peace you fought so hard to receive. The real challenge after crossing a threshold is not always open rebellion. Sometimes it is emotional familiarity. You can know something was unhealthy and still miss what felt familiar about it. You can know God delivered you from something and still feel tenderness toward the parts of it that once met real needs within you. That tenderness does not mean you should return. It simply means you are human. It means your soul is still processing what your spirit already understands. Healing often requires grieving what can no longer come with you, even when you know it is the right thing to leave behind. You do not need to turn people into villains in order to remain free. You do not need to rewrite every memory as darkness. Freedom often begins with something much simpler. It begins with telling the truth about what that connection produced in your life, and whether it moved you closer to peace or further away from yourself. Some things were never evil. They were simply finished. Some things were never meant to last forever. They simply reached the end of their purpose. Certain places were not dark or cursed. They were completed chapters. Certain people were not villains in your story. They were connected to a version of you that no longer exists in the same way. And God is inviting you to move forward rather than return. There is a maturity that learns how to honor the past without living inside it. It does not need anger to create a boundary, and it does not need a dramatic ending to close a door. It understands that private obedience carries its own authority. It can quietly say, I am grateful for what this season taught me, and I am no longer willing to shrink myself to fit inside it again. Sometimes the old season returns through guilt. It reminds you of the people who depended on you. It questions your growth and asks whether you have changed too much. It may even make you feel selfish for protecting a peace that took years to find. Yet guilt is not always a sign that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it is simply the discomfort that comes when unhealthy patterns lose their grip. At other times, the old season returns through nostalgia. Memory has a way of highlighting the beautiful moments while hiding the cycles that caused the pain. It can replay a single comforting memory and quietly erase the countless moments that left you exhausted. Be careful when the past begins presenting itself as something it never truly was. Loneliness can become another doorway through which old patterns try to return. There are quiet evenings when freedom feels unfamiliar and mornings when the absence of chaos feels strangely empty. Yet not every empty space requires an immediate replacement. Some spaces remain open because God is preparing room for something healthier to grow. Then there is false urgency. It tells you that everything must be decided right now. It makes pressure feel spiritual and impatience feel wise. Yet God does not rely on panic to guide his people. His direction may be firm, but it does not demand that you betray yourself in order to follow it. When uncertainty appears, ask yourself a simple question. Does this lead me toward greater peace and obedience, or does it pull me back into fear? Does this bring clarity to my spirit, or does it create confusion? Does it honor the decision I made, or does it invite me to undo the very thing that set me free? There is a difference between peace and familiarity, and learning that difference changes everything. Peace may feel unfamiliar because you are still learning how to live inside it. Familiarity may feel comforting because it knows exactly where your old wounds are. One expands your life. The other keeps you circling what you already outgrew. For years you may have felt as though you were standing before a gate that refused to open. You prayed there. You waited there. You waited there. You questioned yourself there. You watched others move ahead while wondering whether heaven had somehow forgotten you. Yet the gate was never closed because you were rejected. It remained closed because there were things you were carrying that could not pass through with you. Some burdens cannot enter sacred places. Some old agreements cannot travel into a new season. The issue was never your worthiness. The issue was what still needed to be released. Then something changed. You stopped asking the wrong places to become the right ones. You stopped confusing exhaustion with faithfulness and fear with wisdom. That decision became the turning point. You may not have seen the shift immediately, but something moved. The gate responded to alignment. What striving could never force, obedience quietly unlocked. The key was never louder effort. The key was agreement. Now hear this carefully. Do not use that key to reopen what God helped you leave behind. Do not take fresh clarity and spend it wandering back into old confusion. Do not use restored strength to carry burdens that have already expired. The peace God is teaching you to receive was never meant to be spent maintaining patterns that wounded your spirit. Many people return to old doors because the new season feels too quiet. They mistake silence for abandonment and stillness for inactivity. They assume that if there is no chaos, nothing important is happening. Yet some of God's deepest work happens in places where performance is no longer required. That is why healing unfolds on multiple levels. Your spirit may already know the truth while your thoughts are still recovering from years of pressure. Your calling may be alive and active while parts of your inner world continue learning how to trust what God has already spoken. Growth often arrives in stages, and there is grace for that process. Earlier, a question was placed before you. What if the fog was never who you were? What if the heaviness you have carried was never evidence that you were falling behind? What if years of stress, disappointment, and survival simply taught you to live beneath the clarity God intended for you? There is something deeply sacred about becoming clear again, not only spiritually clear, but mentally present, able to notice what God is showing you, able to make decisions without panic, able to receive peace without turning it into suspicion, able to move through life with a steadiness that no longer depends on constant pressure. You are not becoming someone new. In many ways, you are returning to who you were always meant to be. The clarity, creativity, openness, and inner knowing that once felt distant are being welcomed back into your life. And sometimes restoration begins exactly therewith, a clearer mind, a quieter spirit, and a heart finally able to say yes without fear. Now return to the heart of what truly matters. No resource, method, or outside support can replace the decision you already made. The deepest shift happened when you stopped partnering with the very thing that was draining your spirit. That is why this moment deserves protection. Guard your clarity, guard your peace, and guard the clean space that opened when confusion finally lost its hold on you. Do not let guilt rush you back into places you were released from. Do not let loneliness convince you that bondage was comfort, and do not allow nostalgia to tell a story that ignores the truth. This day is not about chasing signs or revisiting old doors. It is about honoring what has already been marked in your life and trusting that your obedience mattered even before you can see the full result. You may not see everything unfolding yet, and that is perfectly all right. Seeds do not become trees overnight, and meaningful doors do not always open with dramatic announcements. Some of the most important transitions begin in stillness. That stillness is not evidence that nothing is happening. It is often the first deep breath after years spent surviving. So if the next step feels quiet, do not mistake quietness for delay. Quiet may simply mean the old voices have lost their authority. It may mean the noise has faded enough for you to hear clearly. It may mean God is teaching you how to trust without needing chaos to prove that something is moving. The season ahead is not about striving. It is about sealing what has already happened. You will need language for this new place. You will need reminders when old patterns try to negotiate their way back into your life. The threshold has been crossed, and that matters, the gate responded. The old season may still knock from time to time, but it no longer carries the key. Heaven is not asking you to prove your freedom to anyone. You do not need to explain every decision to people who only knew the version of you that existed before this crossing. You do not need to return to old situations just to see whether they still have power over you. The answer has already been given. This day is for protection. It is for honoring the peace that followed your obedience. It is for allowing your body to learn that a quiet day is still a meaningful day. Sometimes rest becomes the first evidence that fear is no longer directing your life. There are simple ways to honor what has shifted inside you. Do not return to old doors looking for emotional confirmation. You do not need another explanation, another conversation, or another sign from a place that already revealed its true nature. What often appears as a search for closure is sometimes an old attachment looking for one more opportunity to speak. Protect certain decisions with privacy. There is something sacred about obedience that does not require constant explanation. Some choices grow stronger when they are allowed to remain between you and God for a season. Not everyone is assigned to understand what heaven has already confirmed within you. Give your hands something simple to agree with. Clear a small space around you, whether it is a desk, a corner of a room, or the place where you rest. Small outward actions can help the heart settle into what has already happened inwardly. Sometimes the soul embraces a decision more deeply when the body participates in it. Write down one simple truth and let it stay where you can see it. Remind yourself that you will no longer mistake bondage for comfort, that those words speak gently to the part of you that still misses what is familiar. Let them remind you that peace does not need constant excitement in order to be real. And allow yourself to rest without guilt. This may be one of the hardest lessons, because survival often teaches people that they must earn everything they receive. Yet today, let rest become part of your obedience. Let stillness become agreement. Allow yourself the dignity of being human without apologizing for it. The next challenge may arrive in an unexpected form. It may come disguised as peace. After years of pressure, a calm room can feel unfamiliar. After years of noise, silence can seem suspicious. After years spent surviving, safety can feel almost uncomfortable because your body has forgotten what it is like to relax. Do not run from peace simply because it lacks the intensity you once associated with movement. Peace may not create the rush that chaos once created, but it produces something far more valuable. It returns the pieces of you that pressure slowly stole away. It restores what constant striving could never give back. Healthy opportunities often arrive differently than unhealthy ones. They do not demand panic. They do not require self-abandonment. They do not ask you to become smaller, harder, louder, or more desperate in order to enter them. Sometimes they simply open quietly, and that quiet invitation can feel unfamiliar when disorder has been your normal. God does not always confirm his direction with dramatic signs. Sometimes confirmation arrives as the disappearance of inner unrest. Sometimes it comes when you no longer feel compelled to fight every battle. Sometimes it appears as a silence that feels full rather than empty. A silence that carries permission instead of fear. If peace feels unfamiliar, allow yourself time to learn it. If quietness feels new, allow yourself to trust it. If the next step seems simple, do not dismiss it as insignificant. Life may have taught you to value only what exhausts you, but God does not need to wound you in order to lead you. The old season felt powerful because it was familiar. It had years of repetition behind it. It knew your fears, your habits, and the places where you felt most vulnerable. It knew how to speak through guilt, urgency, and memory. Yet repetition is not authority. History is not destiny. Familiarity is not a command. You are allowed to outgrow what once defined you. You are allowed to appreciate a season and still leave it behind. You are allowed to love people while changing the level of access they have to your life. And you are allowed to carry the wisdom of a lesson without moving back into the classroom where you learned it. That was the moment heaven recognized your yes. Not when people finally understood you, Not when everything became clear on the outside. Not when life suddenly made sense. It was the moment your spirit chose alignment over attachment and quiet obedience over emotional habit. That was the turning point heaven marked. Now, speak gently to the part of you that still feels unsteady. Let it know it is not being punished. Let it know it is not being abandoned. Let it know that the old fear does not have to follow you into this new place. You are not losing yourself. You are releasing what kept you from fully becoming who you were meant to be. There is a difference that matters deeply here. Losing yourself means self-betrayal. Losing yourself means health betrayal. Letting go of an old agreement means healing. One pulls you smaller, quieter, more disconnected from who you are. The other brings you back into yourself. One drains your spirit. The other restores your voice and your sense of wholeness. One is fear dressed as loyalty. The other is obedience wrapped in peace. So now, gently, speak truth over your own life. Not as performance, not as pressure, but as anchoring. Words that help your spirit settle when old patterns try to pull you backward. Let them be simple. Let them be honest. Let them belong to you. I am not who the waiting season tried to shape me into. I am not only what I endured. I am not only the weight I carried or the moments I was overlooked. I am not defined by the years I kept going without being understood. I am no longer returning to what God has already revealed and confirmed. I am not rebuilding what has already been released. I am not confusing clarity with confusion anymore. I am not shrinking myself just to make old spaces comfortable again. I am allowed to grow without apology, and I am allowed to become without shrinking back. I can receive without guilt. I can rest without losing my direction. I can stay aligned without needing validation. I can be misunderstood and still remain true. I can be quiet and still carry strength. I can be gentle and still be finished with what no longer belongs in my life. I can stand alone for a season and still feel held. I crossed what needed to be crossed. I stepped out of what no longer held life for me. I closed what needed to be closed. I stopped negotiating with what was already complete. And heaven saw that moment. Let those words settle instead of rushing past them. Your spirit has carried voices of doubt, fear, and old emotional weight for a long time. Today, let truth take up more space than those voices. Not through intensity, but through stillness that stays. You were not chosen to feel superior. You were not chosen to prove anything to anyone. You were chosen to live with clarity, to move with integrity, and to follow what is right, even when it is quiet. You are learning how to walk with peace without abandoning yourself. What matters now is not only crossing the threshold, but honoring it in daily life. That means paying attention to what you keep engaging with, what you keep feeding, and what you allow to reopen after it has already been released. Pause here for a moment. Let your body soften. Let your breath slow. You are not required to solve your entire future right now. You are only asked to stay present with the step you are in. You have enough for today. You have enough clarity for this moment. You have enough peace for this hour. And sometimes that is all grace gives at once, so you do not carry tomorrow before it arrives. The shift has already happened. The door has already opened. The past may still echo in your mind, but an echo is not authority. It is only the fading sound of something that no longer leads you. Now let this become a quiet seal over everything you have walked through, not something dramatic, not something forced, just a settled agreement between your heart and what you already know is true. Take a moment to acknowledge it inwardly. Every step that brought you here mattered. Every quiet decision mattered. Every quiet decision mattered. Every moment you chose differently mattered. Even when no one saw it, it still counted. I release what I no longer need to carry. I release the need to be understood in order to be at peace. I release the urge to explain what has already been confirmed within me. I release fear that tries to disguise itself as wisdom. I release guilt that does not belong to me. I release the pull of old memories that distort what is true. I release the version of myself that kept returning to what was already finished. I receive what is new. I receive clarity that feels steady even when it is unfamiliar. I receive rest without earning it. I receive peace without suspicion. I receive direction without fear. I receive growth without shrinking back, and I ask to be kept steady in what has begun, to stay open to peace, to stay grounded in truth, to stay free from the pull of what no longer belongs to me, to recognize what is finished without reopening it, to walk forward without hesitation born from fear. If anything tries to pull me backward, let truth be louder than memory. If fear rises, let peace answer it. If loneliness speaks, let presence quiet it. If old patterns return in thought, let clarity remain stronger. I will not return to what I have been released from. I will not rebuild what has already ended. I will not confuse familiarity with destiny. I will not trade peace for old patterns. I will not abandon the ground I have just gained. This is where the old season ends its influence. This is where the old season ends its influence. This is where alignment becomes steady. This is where the shift becomes lived, not just understood. Heaven saw it, and what heaven has marked, I will not undo.